All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel and another episode in our series of the fantastic, mystical, Hermetic philosophy coming to us from the Kybalion and three initiates. And as we learned last week, the answer to the mystery of the three initiates, and if you were there, then you caught that. And we will continue from where we left off last week. We are still in the introduction. Just in the beginning, I believe this is part 3 of the series. Let's see if we can find it here. Atkinson. Atkinson was the man, and then thought to be. Atkinson wrote the book by himself, but he wanted to acknowledge his debt to Kingsford and Maitland. They were the other two initiates. And so, thus it is possible to trace the lineage for the Kybalion, the original Hermetic texts, which have been known in the Western world since the 15th century, ladies and gentlemen, and the digest of these texts as presented by Kingsford and Maitland in Victorian London. And now we come to the biggest question of all so far, after learning what we've learned on the history of the Kybalion, is, like I was just saying, we face now the biggest and most difficult question of all, especially for those of us who are big fans of the Hermetic philosophy and have been here for our journey, if I can get to it over here, in the Corpus Hermeticum and the Hermetica, ladies and gentlemen. And that question being, what value do the teachings of the Kybalion truly have? And, even more interesting, are they true? Well, there are many testimonials to the effects of thought power on events in the physical world, but then there are also countless cases, many of which we never hear about. Now, think about this, because this is something we talk about often here and think about often, is the power of mind and the power of our minds to have an influence on reality in one way or another, however slight or the opposite of that. But we just spoke about this yesterday, talking about being like water and the Taoist philosophy coming to us from Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. But then there was the idea that Dr. Emoto gave to us, who was the scientist who did the experiment of the frozen jars of water, these ones labeled with positive things like love and peace and whatever, and the other ones labeled with negative things like hate and destruction. And the frozen crystallization forms of the water in the positive ones were like beautiful forms and shapes, and in the negative ones, they were very dissonant, and you could obviously tell there was a difference. And so then this went to, if we are water, this is also Dr. Emoto's implication from this research, is that if we are water, or a large percentage thereof, and our consciousness is affecting the frequencies, the field, the vibrations, whatever you want to call it, then we should be very careful what we think about if we would like to experience a more harmonious experience in life, or if we would like to have a dissonance, a resonance, harmony, and a dissonance, and a lack of harmony. It is our choice. And that brings us to the power of our thoughts. See, what we think about affects this. Going back to the very beginning of what we're reading here today, continuing in the introduction of the Kybalion. Once again, thank you for being here and joining me. We're reading this for purposes of teaching and commentary and expanding the mind. So through that increased awareness, hopefully we can increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Spiritual philosophy, ladies and gentlemen. So, there are many testimonials to the effects of thought power, the effects of thought power on events in the physical world. Now, we just gave an example of that through Dr. Emoto's work. But then there are also countless cases, many of which we never hear about, which is why I thought I would bring up that example. And if you've never heard of that, check that out after this premiere, or even pause it, go check it out and come back. Either way, it's very fascinating. And this is an example of thought power having an effect on events in the physical world. And so, in which these ideas simply did not work or did not work as expected. So, in other words, people weren't able to manifest the $1 million they thought they were told that they could through this mystical teaching about the power of the mind and the all in the all and the divine paradox and the mental universe and mental transmutation and the 7 Hermetic principles. People, I think sometimes think that it's just like a vending machine, and God or universe, grand organized, they think that God is just going to give them, if they put tokens in spiritual effort practice, they put in their tokens and then they can select. This is not how this works. So if that is your conception of how to work with, once again, yesterday we talked all about flowing and flowing with this God force, grand organized design, universal intelligence, in order to have the things that you would like to show up for yourself in your life possibly be available to you. Because, it's so often we're like, yes, I would like $1 million. And then we're trying to do these. I mean, some people have no interest in manifesting when it comes to these spiritual philosophies. They're just trying to enjoy life a little bit more through a greater awareness of ourselves, which is why I'm here. But, so often these people that are wanting this mystical knowledge to create abundance for themselves think they want money, but really they just want a feeling of security, contentment, and abundance. So think more about the emotions when you're trying to manifest things rather than the things, because it's not the things. And that's a disconnection. Anyways, weird, random ramble tangent there. But if you've been here before, you know that's where we go often. So thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. We face the biggest and most difficult question of all. What value do the teachings of the Kybalion have, and are they true? Because there are many testimonials to the effects of thought power on events in the physical world, which we will talk a lot about in this series. But then there are also countless cases, many of which we never hear about, in which these ideas simply did not work and did not work as expected. To speak personally again, the author writes, I would endorse the basic idea of mind power. Indeed, there are levels of mind at which to think something is to make it happen. Nonetheless, the levels of mind that possess this creative power are surrounded by heavy defenses in the psyche. Nonetheless, for most people, they are inaccessible. You can force your way through these barricades with certain techniques or certain drugs. This may be what the traditional occult literature calls the confrontation with the dweller on the threshold. This term, used in Edward Bulwer Lytton's classic occult novel, Zanoni, in 1842. This refers essentially, and I have this highlighted here, along with that bit that says you can force your way through these barricades with certain techniques or certain, state altering substances, like we talked about in Mysteries of the Unexplained, the oracle and the oracles using, the laurel leaves and these gases that were coming out of the vapors coming out of the floors and the caves, and being able to access prophetic information or knowledge through an altered state of mind, different than your normal conscious waking state with all the filters that come with that. And so, this being also the same, getting to these levels of mind at which you are so in tune and connected and in harmony that you can literally think a thought and it manifests and appears in reality. That, I mean, if you can think to yourself, if you had that power, how many times would you accidentally create something that you didn't actually want to create? Because how many of us have that level of mastery over our thoughts? And so, the levels of mind that possess this creative power are surrounded by heavy defenses in the psyche, and for most people, it's impossible. And for most people, it would not be a good idea because we'd be manifesting all the things that we don't want. Because most of us, which is one of the basic reasons I'm into spiritual philosophy, is most of us spend a large percentage of our life thinking about the things that we don't like and the things that we don't want and how we don't have enough of this. And it's weird. And if we knew we had this ability, I had no idea this was going to go this direction today. I literally was just like, all right, let's finish up the introduction. And now here we are rambling about manifesting and the ability to create what it is that you think about and the power thought. But you see where I was going with that ramble once again, ladies and gentlemen. It's like we don't have the level of mastery over our thoughts that we would need to have in order to be able to use appropriately the ability to create from our thoughts. And not just create, but have, remember, back here, to have the effects of our thought have impact on events in the physical world. And then to be at the level of which to think something is to make it happen. And so we can force our way through these barricades that are up in our subconscious mind, the psyche, with certain techniques or certain mind altering substances. But this refers essentially to the psychic barrier between the conscious and the unconscious mind, as I just said, the subconscious. But unless you are extremely well trained and well prepared, and probably even then, this attempt is likely to distort and injure the mind rather than enlightening it. So, this is a warning for those of us out there trying to think that we can go the quick route. Remember the old example of the Jedis. And in order to be able to become a Jedi, you not only had to be a unique individual who had this ability. I mean, we all have this ability, so maybe that's a bad example. But they had to go from very young age, child, to temple. And you lived at the temple, and all you did was study and practice and meditate upon, quote unquote, the Force. And this example here is what we were talking about in the Hermetic philosophy of the Corpus Hermeticum and the Hermetica, is that a pure philosophy is a spiritual striving through a constant contemplation to attain true knowledge of the things that are. And in the first words of the Corpus Hermeticum, it begins by saying, "Write this book, O my son, for both piety's sake, reverence and honor, and for humanity's sake, for piety to God, and both for that and humanity's sake." All right, I rambled too much, and I confused myself, so we're going to go right there. For both humanity's sake and for piety towards God. For there can be no religion more true or just than to know the things that are, and to acknowledge thanks for all things and to that which made them, which thing we shall not cease continually doing. So if we are trying to become sages, philosophers, a truest and purest philosopher, magicians, or metaphorically, Jedis, then, it's like what was just being said there. If you are trying to go the short route and not spending the years and years of contemplation, preparation, and meditation, and you're trying to use mind-altering substances or other more, you know, techniques that we know would be a short route rather than the correct way. I just think the Star Wars example is the best because, through anger and hatred and all of these very powerful emotions, you can also gain access to certain areas of consciousness, but it's out of control. I mean, it might be slightly more powerful, but when you go through the harmonious side, the light side, rather than the dark side, and you take the long road with great diligence and dedication, then it's under control and you can use it in the right way, so to speak. I mean, this is all just me trying to understand this for myself as well. But this is what's being talked about here, is that there are levels of mind that possess a creative power so much that it is that to think a thing is to make it happen. Now, if you don't believe that's true, then that's fine. I'm glad this is the first time you're hearing about that, because this is what I like to call, or what Wayne Dyer called, credit to Dr. Wayne Dyer, the science of lucky people. And we know. So, once again, the highlighted bits that I focused on there, because it really, it was like, whoa, this is important. This needs to be thought about a lot, even though it's just a couple sentences. Is it's dangerous to force your way through these barricades that are up, so average people don't just start using this ability and doing, things that we wouldn't want to do in the first place. Once again, that goes back to the idea of, like, if you could create something just by thinking about it, how many things would you all of a sudden start creating that you didn't want to? And so, essentially, this psychic barrier between the conscious and the unconscious minds is what protects us. Unless we are extremely well trained, so years and years of meditation and contemplation on working with and using Atum, God, the God force, whatever you want to call it, well trained and well prepared, probably even then, this attempt is likely to distort and injure the mind rather than enlightening it. And this is as it should be. I mean, do you really want the power to think something and instantly make it happen? Certain times we would love that. Do you have the will and self-mastery that would require? Probably none of us. Probably none of us. So, in any case, I believe that thought power, in its ultimate form, both offers more power and presents more risks than many people would believe. And for the simpler and easier and less effective forms of thought power, like positive suggestion, positive psychology, which is where anybody who gets into this starts, I'm guessing. But positive suggestions and so on, I believe they also work. Although in less dramatic ways, simpler and easier, and it still works. And so this is an example to us that this works. There's just greater and lesser values, greater and lesser intensity levels. How would you describe that? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I had no idea today was going to go this way. This has been a lot funner introduction than I thought it would be. And the funny thing is there's two introductions. But we will get there. Hermes, the god of wisdom. Egyptians revered his memory for many centuries. Yes, tens of centuries, calling him the scribe of the gods, and bestowing upon him distinctly his ancient title, Trismegistus, which means the thrice great, the great great, and the greatest great. In all the ancient lands, the name of Hermes Trismegistus was revered, the name being synonymous with the fountain of wisdom. That was just a random part that I skipped ahead to. We will be getting into the founder of astrology, the discoverer of alchemy. Well, well, ladies and gentlemen. Well, well. But in any case, thought power, I mean, they also work. The greater forms and the lesser forms, just in less dramatic ways. Certainly it is better to be saying kind and cheering things to yourself. Please get this. If you have been spending a lot of time saying not so kind and cheering things to yourself, like quit being nice, or quit being nice, quit being so, say, quit being nice to, sometimes we just like destroy ourselves more than we ever would say to anybody else. It's for some reason we're like out to get ourselves. It's the subconscious, it's the ego that's doing this. But so we need to quit being mean to ourselves. Oh, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes I just go off. And so positive suggestion. It's like certainly it is better to say kind and cheering things to yourself than harmful and destructive ones. But I also believe there are limits to this practice. The subconscious knows when it is being lied to. As for the Kybalion's specific teachings, my own opinion is that they are true. This is once again the opinion of, was it William Walker Atkinson, I believe? I'd have to look closely. I just keep seeing the name Atkinson, but he also wrote under the pseudonym of Yogi Ramachakra in his other book, Lessons in Jnana Yoga. I'm just trying to see if I got that name right, but Atkinson. Anyways, the author, in his own opinion, these teaching, in my point, if you're like, no, all of this just made up, this Hermetic philosophy, even if it is, the the implications are profound. And I mean, this has been debated before, and we talked about this earlier on this series a couple episodes ago. Right here says, in this sense, and we were just getting at, as for the Kybalion specific teachings, it is the author's own opinion that they are true, but it is not easy to grasp their essential connection from the terms that it presents. This is going back to the idea that tracing the lineage of the Kybalion, and in this sense, the aphorisms in the Kybalion are very likely a fraud. Certainly, their style and mode of thought are more evocative of 20th century America than they are of ancient Egypt or Renaissance Europe. Even so, thinking this way, it would be a great mistake to conclude that this work is unfaithful to the tradition it lays claim to. A spiritual tradition is based certainly on timeless and unchanging truths. The application to which these truths are put will vary from age to age, in accordance with that age's need, but nonetheless, the timeless and unchanging truths, the wisdom of the ages. That's why I've always been fascinated. It's like every spiritual tradition, regardless, seems to be talking about this same thing. Whether you call it Atum, God, the Tao, grand organized design, great spirit, universal intelligence, a creative life force. I mean, we can go on and on. It's the same thing. So we are trying to discover that for ourselves. So, it's not easy to grasp their essential connection from the terms that are presented, because this is very deep and mystical and a little bit too deep for the common. But that's why we're here. Hopefully, if you never heard about this and this is your first time, thank you for being here. Introduction. We can learn together. I'm no master once again, so join me in this journey of learning. Take the idea that the universe is entirely mental in nature. On the surface, this idea appears to be false. On the surface, it seems that there are at least two distinct types of events. Mental events take place in one's mind, and they are not publicly accessible, not at any rate without some type of communication. We normally distinguish between these and physical events, which are, for the most part, publicly accessible. To see if you and I are in the same room, ladies and gentlemen, and there is a green lamp on the table, we will both see it. But, as the author has said in his book, The Dice Game of Shiva, How Consciousness Creates the Universe, there is more truth to the idea of mentalism than there may seem to be. We can understand it more clearly if we take the following viewpoint. There is that which experiences, so this is us, the experiencer, and that which is experienced. The former has many names in the world's traditions: the self, the Atman, the Purusha, the true I, Buddha nature, the spirit. It is pure cognition and has no contents of its own. This is why I love spiritual philosophy. Getting into this, the real meat of it here. Or I guess the real vegetables. What do we do with that saying nowadays? Oh, but the I, the self, the spirit, it is pure cognition. It has no contents of its own. Then, so that was the experiencer. Then there is that which is experienced. This includes the sum total of all experience, both physical and mental. It is variously known as the Prakriti, the world, I don't know, the pronunciations there. Forgive me if I pronounce some things wrong. The Prakrti, Prakrti, quote unquote, the world, as in the Gospels, and even matter. But it is not matter as conventionally understood. It is simply that which is perceived in all forms. So, kind of like God is everything, including the rocks and the trees, and, the plants and the bees, and the books and the tables and the chairs and us, all at the same time. It is all of the forms. And this is a lot what the Tao Te Ching talks about, which we've been doing that more lately. The former has many names, so the experiencer and that which is experienced. The experiencer is the self, the I, the spirit, the cognition, and then the experienced is the world, known as matter, but not individual in all forms. In this sense, a rock is matter, but so is the image of a rock in our mind. That's a deep part there. That requires more contemplation and meditation. In this sense, a rock is matter. Everybody knows that. But also, so is the image of a rock in our mind. Prakrti is constantly changing, constantly moving, constantly altering. Hence, the Kybalion can tell us through one of the Hermetic principles, which I believe is vibration, that nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. In ordinary human consciousness, that which experiences is entangled with that which is experienced. We believe we are what we experience. We believe we are the thoughts and emotions that pass through the mind. We become what we behold. It can be difficult to detach the two from each other, but I believe that this is precisely the goal of many forms of meditation. Precisely the goal. Many forms of meditation. That which experiences is entangled with that which experiences. And then we begin to believe we are what we experience. And then we begin to believe that the thoughts and emotions that we have, we are that too. And this is where all the stress and anxiety and 90% of the struggle in life comes from. I'm not saying that there aren't things that we aren't supposed to go through to learn from and to grow from. However, a lot of the time, it's going to be what Dr. Wayne Dyer called your erroneous zones. Your erroneous zones. Overcoming our worst enemy, ourselves. I mean, here, I'm just going to read the back. If we're plagued by our guilt or worry and find ourselves repeating the same self-destructive behavior and thought patterns, then we have erroneous zones. Whole facets of our approach to life that act as barriers to our happiness. And we need to begin to take charge of ourselves and learn how to worry less and overcome the obstacles in our way and develop true inner peace. Self-reliance is what he was talking about. But I mean, that connects to what we're talking about right here. Is it's like that which experiences is entangled with that which is experienced. And we believe we are that. And we need to become self-actualizing individuals, enlightened men and women. That's why we're sharing the wisdom of the ages. And the wisdom specifically of Hermetic philosophy, because this knowledge influenced the greatest minds and times in our history. And so this is the goal of many forms of meditation and self-help. But we'll continue with what the book says before I ramble more. The self, as pure witness, watches all phenomena. So we become the witness through the meditation to see the difference between that which is experienced and the experiencer. The self, as pure witness, watches all phenomena, mental and physical, inner and outer, pleasant and unpleasant, as images passing across the screen of the mind. In this sense, we can say that all is mental. Notice also that the interaction between self and phenomena can itself vary. Self can identify with the contents of its experience, or it can detach itself from them. So, think about a positive experience compared to a negative one. We can identify with the contents of one experience or the other and have an attachment to that, or other times totally detach from it. It seems likely to me, the author continues, that neither of these stances is really absolute, so there's some kind of a gray area in our judgment. And so this goes back to the understanding of the oneness and the paradoxical duality that we're like, oh, this is good or bad from our perspective, but really it just is. And so that none of these stances is really absolute, and indeed they can alternate or appear to alternate rapidly in many cases. Self identifies with its contents and then detaches itself from them. This is very deep, ladies and gentlemen. Let us go further and posit that this process takes place at all levels of manifestation, from that of the subatomic particle to the atom, to our own level and beyond. Even Dr. Wayne Dyer, best-selling author of more than 20 other books on self-help, self-actualization, self-reliance, positive psychology, talked about in his later years this knowledge of the strangest secret, which is not. Anyways, the secret of the universe is that what we think about expands. This is what we're learning. The world all is mental. This is what we've learned in the Hermetica and the Kybalion so far, and the Corpus Hermeticum. All of this Hermetic philosophy from the Egyptian sage god Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus, the great, teaches us that what we think about expands. And our minds have the greatest impact on our lives. And so we need to begin to go forward with that awareness. Maybe we can begin to strengthen it and also begin to use it appropriately. But the idea, sometimes I'll start talking about something and then I forget what I was talking about by the time I get to the end of saying something else. Hopefully you're getting value, and I know you are. Thank you so much for being here. I love and appreciate each and every one of you for spending time with me. But even Wayne talked about going from the world of waves, frequencies, vibrations, to the world of particles. And we've learned in quantum physics that this is exactly and entirely how everything that exists in the physical realm exists. There is a gray area between frequencies and vibrations, waves, thought, and the world of particles, waves into particles. And now from that understanding, we come back to the occult esoteric teachings from centuries ago that are telling us the same thing that modern quantum physics is just now beginning to say, oh, maybe this mystical stuff might actually kind of have some foundation in reality, ladies and gentlemen. Anyways, I don't know who I'm yelling at. Maybe it's myself. Maybe it's myself. Is it the experiencer or that which is experienced? Am I identifying with the contents of my experience, or am I detaching myself from them? This, once again, is very deep, and thank you for being here, joining me for some spiritual philosophy and contemplation on Hermetics. Now, let's go further and posit that this process takes place at all levels of manifestation, from that of the subatomic particle to the atom, to our own level and beyond. And it is my view, the author suggests, entirely legitimate to speak of consciousness, to speak of the consciousness of the atom. Very interesting. To speak of the consciousness of the atom. If we posit some kind of process whereby this goes on and constantly, and shall we say habitually, we know that we can now see the source of the quote unquote principle of vibration. Remember the waves to the particles that the Kybalion describes, and which, as it points out, is the standard feature of the universe. Because this process takes place at all levels and scales of reality, we also see the source of the correspondence among all levels that the Kybalion asserts. In fact, these considerations help explain all the basic principles of the Kybalion. In addition, the ones I have just mentioned, in addition to the ones that we have just mentioned, we have polarity. So remember, we have vibration, law of correspondence, polarity, which is the polarity between self and the world, between that which is experienced and that which experiences. Gender, self and other, that which experiences, that which is experienced, correspond to the masculine and the feminine, respectively, which once again is positive, negative polarities. Balanced poles, a oneness made of a duality, the paradoxical unity and duality. Rhythm, the perpetual alternation between identification and attachment between self and other, again, at all levels, generates the rhythm of the universe. Cause and effect. What we observe as cause and effect is simply the operation and outcome of these processes. And in the event, even these few brief points that we've just talked about today, ladies and gentlemen, can help us to see that these ideas are not merely an arbitrary string of axioms that somebody is just like, but expressions of certain basic principles that, once understood, illuminate the mind of all. Winfield, Illinois, November 2016. And that is the introduction to the Kybalion. Because as it said, ladies and gentlemen, remember, some could say, oh, it's just a pious fraud. But it would be a great mistake to conclude that this work is unfaithful to the tradition that it is based on and not touching on some of the most incredible, timeless, and unchanging spiritual truths that we have come to know. What I like to call, ladies and gentlemen, the wisdom of the ages. All right, that was fantastic. We take great pleasure in presenting to the attention of students and investigators of the secret doctrines this little work based upon the old world Hermetic teachings. There has been so little written on the subject, notwithstanding the countless references to the teachings in many works upon occultism, that the many earnest searchers after the arcane truths will doubtless welcome the appearance of the present volume. Be sure, ladies and gentlemen, to seek. Sorry, I'm looking for my bookmark. Aha, there it is. Boom, we've got a mountain. A mountain. Be sure, ladies and gentlemen, to remember to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of reality. And so, hopefully, through that awareness, we can increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Because our lives are made up of moments. And so, if we can increase the quality of our moments, then it'll hopefully all get better. But remember that there is no way to happiness. It's not something you're gonna get. It's not a result. It is what you bring to life. So there is no way to happiness, enlightenment. It is the way. And once we can create the ability within ourselves to bring it to life, that's what this work is all about here. And we can create this ability within ourselves to bring enlightenment, to bring happiness to life. Then all the things we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll finally be happy when I have this much, or I'll finally be enlightened when I learn this, that becomes irrelevant because then we are there. And then the entire journey, hopefully, is wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Be sure to expand the description below the video, whichever side. I think right down here, click the button down there to expand it again. And we have got links to this book, this one, and this one, so you can get it for yourself to put it on your shelf. So you can follow along in the future, as well as a link to my Etsy shop and my landscape paintings. I haven't checked on that in a while. I'll have to check that out and see how that's going. And also a link to C60 Purple Power, ladies and gentlemen. The most powerful antioxidant known to man. Nobel Prize winning. So check that out and give yourself the gift of health. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, thank you so much. I love and appreciate each and every one of you for spending time here with me and all the wonderful authors and poets, mystics, philosophers, and sages of the ages. And until next time, be the change that you want to see. Be the example that you want to set. Continue to search for the lost wisdom of the ages and the mysteries of our history. All right, love you, ladies and gentlemen. No, 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 no.